Here are the mechanicals buttons. What? It does not say that they're going to be clicky. No way. Hello and welcome to another Nihongo Gamer video. As you know, I'm super into controllers on this channel. I've got pad controllers, I've got arcade stick controllers, and I've got controllers that don't have a stick on them at all. They're just like buttons only. But most recently, I've just received this. Now what you're looking at here is called the Fighting Commander OCTA. I received this from HORI to show it to you today, so I'm going to unbox it and show it to you, but there's a lot of reasons why you might be very excited about this coming out to replace this controller. One of the main reasons you would choose a Fighting Commander over something like the official pad that comes with like a PlayStation 4 is because it's got 6 face buttons, which means if you play fighting games like this with your hand over, you have access to all 6 buttons using 3 fingers or 4 fingers or as many fingers as you like. And so I'm very excited to see what HORI has done to update the Fighting Commander. Alright, so here's a look at the front of the box. You can see it's the HORI Fighting Commander OCTA for Xbox Series X. I'm hoping that they're going to come out with a version for PlayStation 5 or PlayStation 4 or Nintendo Switch later on down the line. Then here's a look at the side of the box, which shows us these very healthy looking pad triggers here on the front of the controller, the top of the controller. And on the back is a list of all the features. Now, one of the main things that I thought was really interesting about what I saw on the features list of this controller is that apparently you could adjust the input sensitivity of the D-pad. Like, I'm very curious to see how that's going to be adjustable in the software that it comes with. Like on the previous HORI Fighting Commander, you also have 6 buttons as the layout. It now has what I think are mechanical switches. So to compare on something like the original Fighting Commander, it had, I think these are membrane switches. Next interesting feature is the analog stick. Although it looks like a regular analog stick here on the front of the box, what actually, if you have a closer look, it has notches for the 8 different diagonals and cardinal directions on the analog stick. So it will probably feel a little bit more like playing on a GameCube controller, because GameCube, although it was an analog stick, it did have these notches to help you know exactly when you had pressed proper cardinal directions or proper diagonal directions. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, let's get it out. Open up the box. Let's get it out of here as quickly as possible. Whoa, okay, we don't need the box anymore. Sorry, interesting. Okay, yeah, so it has got an Xbox style. Maybe it's just because I haven't owned an Xbox for a long time, but I forgot that Xbox had these quick release ports. And now here it is, the HORI Fighting OCTA. Look at that. Yes! Now first things first, let's just press some of these buttons. Here are the mechanicals buttons. What? Can you hear this? What? I'm not ready for stuff like this, HORI. What? Come on. Did it say that they're clicky? Durable and accurate micro switch buttons. It does not say that they're going to be clicky. No way. Wow, that feels so nice. When you push them, there's no throw before it gets to the click. So when you're resting on here, you just go straight into the click. And then it comes straight back up. So there's no like pushing down, click, click, coming back up. It's just you're resting your hand on the button. It goes click, 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 click. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit excited, but that's only the main action button. So let's move on to the D-pad. Aha, so interestingly, the D-pad is not clicky, but the main buttons are clicky. Now, first impressions are, it does feel nice and clear. It's, you know, tactile, but it's not got a click, like an audible click. So I'm guessing that it is still using a membrane style controller beneath here, which is very similar to what you would expect on something like the original HORI Fighting Commander. And I believe even the official DS4, this is using a membrane style button input on here. And there's nothing wrong with that, just the thing is with membrane controllers, depending on the quality of the switches that they put in, like these can start to feel a bit gummy over time, and like it feels really nice and distinct right now, but over time, depending on the quality of it, it can start to get a little mushy. So this is what I put on my Nintendo Switch, and because I don't like playing fighting games with these split button controllers from the original Joy-Cons, but I have to admit, now that I've been using this for about 3 years now, it does feel a little bit mushy, and I think it's time to buy a new one. But this was like $25, so it's pretty cheap if you need to replace this. Now let's try the analog stick. Okay, reasonable. Okay, so let me explain how the analog stick feels. This is the type of analog stick that wants to be in neutral. It's not as loose as something like on this. This is the HORI pad for the Nintendo Switch. And this one is somewhere in the middle. It stays in neutral, but you can push it into whatever direction and there's not too much tension pushing back on you. And then this one feels ever so slightly more tense. Like you have to push ever so slightly harder. But what's really nice is that it's very distinct. You're either pushing into the direction or you're not. If you were playing games that require very small micro movements, then this one is going to be, I don't know, I feel like I would have less control because I need to push harder. And once I've pushed a certain amount, it like pushes itself into the direction. Exactly the reason why I really like the Hayabusa lever. And I don't know if this is because this is the Japanese edition, but it's not actually that loose. It doesn't just kind of wangle about super loosely. It's actually fairly tense. And then when you push it, it goes into position. And I really like that about this stick. Not saying necessarily that it's better than other levers that are looser. It's just what I'm really into at the moment. The other main thing to remember about this is that it does have notches in it. For a fighting game, almost always you want strict digital inputs. You know, you're pressing right, down, right, left, forward, up, down, you know, whatever the directions are for very specific technical inputs when you're playing a fighting game. And for that reason, it's really nice having a notched analog stick. You know, it might be really fun to see how this compares to a GameCube controller, maybe in a separate video. And just trying these shoulder buttons, I'm surprised that these aren't clicky. So you've got clicky buttons here on the front of the controller, but you also use these buttons for actions when you're playing fighting games, especially on pad. They're membrane buttons, so they don't have an audible click, and they do feel softer and squishier than these buttons here on the front, because these are mechanical switches with clicks. Now, one thing you might find that's missing from this controller compared to the original Fighting Commander is that this one had a switch on the top of the controller that allowed you to choose what this button here on the right did. Are these R buttons or are these L buttons? And the reason this was important was because instead of going from a 4 buttons on the front and 4 buttons on the top controller, if you switched it around, you would end up with 6 buttons on the front, 2 buttons on the top and 2 buttons on the left. And so you feel like you gained 2 extra buttons because you were mapping the R3 sort of analog stick button here. And although I imagine you can change this in the software that comes with this controller, there's no dedicated switch to go from R buttons to L buttons. Because as you can see here on the controller, you've got the R button and the R trigger already set to the front of the pad. If you look at the top, it is already mapped to have the L trigger and L button, even though this is the right side of the pad. And you've got the right stick button and the L stick button, which is usually when you like click the buttons in on your analog stick. But interestingly enough, even though it has mapped the left stick button, the left stick, you know, when you push the analog stick in to press the button, if you actually try this on the controller, you can actually still click it in. I'm guessing that you have L stick click on the actual analog stick, and I think you also have it doubled up here, so you have access to both, which is quite important if you use this feature when you're playing your fighting games, if you use this to like maybe activate certain attacks. Anyway, I am mega excited about trying these clicky mechanical switches here on the front of this pad, and also checking out how easy it is to actually press directions on the D-pad. So it's feeling pretty positive, but it's now time to actually try the HORI Fighting Commander OCTA in some fighting games. Alright, so I've gone onto the Microsoft Store and I have downloaded what's called the HORI Device Manager. Apparently this is the software that recognizes my Fighting Commander OCTA for Xbox Series X, but as you can see, it also works on PC, which is what we're going to be using it on today because I don't own an Xbox Series X or Series S yet. So I'm just going to go over to Profile 1. Let's change the name. We're going to call it Nihongo Gamer Set. So if you've got multiple people using the same controller in the house, you can have different settings for each person. And now we can go into button mapping, D-pad settings, and audio settings. You can change the volume and the microphone sensitivity if you're plugging a headset directly into this port at the base of the controller. I want to check out button mapping first. So this is the standard mapping. It's the Xbox style. So it's X, Y, A, B, RB, R trigger, and then with the left button and left triggers, and then the stick button triggers here on the left side. Let's say I want this to be, you know, standard setting with the right buttons there. Let's click on left button, press A, and let's actually change it to be right button. And viola, it is gone back to how you would expect a controller, and automatically you can see that the left button trigger has been set on this little shortcut button here. What I'm curious to know is if you can double certain inputs. So let's say that I want all of them to be the R button. So this is set to the R button. Can we set this to the R button as well? Interesting. So it does not want you to have multiple settings of the same buttons. There are situations where you might want to have the same action button in multiple places on your controller. I'm not seeing a way to do that right now, but who knows? With software updates in the future, maybe they'll allow that sort of functionality. And while we're at it, since we're making this video right now, Hori, I think it would be quite cool if you could actually set duplicate inputs. So I could have the option to have the right trigger here, but also have the right trigger here, and also have the right trigger in here, and just in multiple places, just for convenience. Whether that's tournament legal, I don't know, and also don't really mind or care. But one thing that is curious is that although I just said you can't have one function set to two different buttons, apparently you can, because this is the left stick button. So you've actually got a single function which is mapped to two different places for convenience. Now it says that you can actually change the sensitivity of the D-pad, and I'm very curious to see what that means. What? Oh my goodness, hang on a second. This is not what I was expecting. So sensitivity for up and right are going to be high, and sensitivity for left and down are going to be low. All right, let's try this. If I press up on here very, very lightly, you can see it registers up in the Windows control panel. And if I press right very lightly, you can see it registers right in the Windows control panel. But if I press down very lightly, nothing gets registered until I push hard. And wow, that is really impressive for a $50 controller. What? If you're playing a game and you find that you're accidentally pressing the diagonals too much, you might want to go into the settings and do something like this. Push very lightly for down, everything's fine. But if I try to go diagonal right, nothing until I push hard. Yes, and there it is. Wow, I'm pushing really hard. Maybe this is old hat, maybe lots of other controllers have done this for a long time, but this is the first time I've seen this in a pad, and it's also the first time I've seen this in a pad for $50. All right, Hori, you got me. You got me. That was awesome. All right, so I've got Street Fighter V set up, and this is probably one of the most common of the fighting games at the moment, and it's usually the one I use to test just basic features. So let's try the direction. So left, right feels good on the HORI Fighting Pad OCTA. Crouching, jumping, diagonal jumping, absolutely no missed inputs or anything. Something that does happen with other pads is that when I tried to do like a half circle motion, I would see like certain motions would get missed. But as you can see from the top input display there, you can see that the down input did actually properly come out. Now, if it were a type of D-pad where it allows like pressing left and right at the same time, which is, in my opinion, a no-go for a D-pad, then you would see it would miss the down input. But as you can see, when I press it really fast, I still get that down input every single time. Very, very happy to see that. Jumping backwards, jumping forwards, back dashing, forward dashing, fireball, brilliant. And I'm just using it with a standard handhold. Normally I hold my pad controllers like this. Even though I've got 6 buttons here, I like to just hold it like this. But obviously one of the cool features of a pad like this is that you could turn your hand over and hold it like this. So if you want, you can have it 6 button style. 1, medium punch, heavy punch, light kick, medium kick, heavy kick, and you can use all 3 of your fingers here for all sorts of, multiple inputs if you've got all sorts of option selects and stuff that you want to do that are complicated but easier to do with multiple fingers. Let's try some dragon punches. Easy peasy. Nice. How about some tatsumakis? So tatsumaki senpukyaku. How about a super combo? Easy. This feels very, very nice indeed. Now, one of the main things that is different about this controller is that it has a very slightly different shape to the D-pad compared to the original Fighting Commander. The original Fighting Commander had this plus sign looking controller, and of course I like this feel. Like no matter where you're pushing on the controller, you never really lose contact with the controller, and I quite like that about this compared to something like a split D-pad on something like the Nintendo Switch. When you press on this button, you kind of lose contact with other buttons, and it's difficult to use it the same way that you would use other pad controllers. And on the HORI Fighting Commander OCTA, it goes one step further. So yes, it is sort of the D-pad shape, but first of all, check this out. It's got this nice concave feel, and to be fair, the original Fighting Commander also had a slightly concave feel to it. But this is a D-pad with a concave feel, and you still sort of feel the diagonals on this controller, because very slightly indented are the diagonal portions of this controller. It's a big circle, but the main things that you need to feel are the plus sign control. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is totally up to you, but I really like the feel of this so far. Now, one more thing we can try here is that instead of using the D-pad, since we've got this analog stick, let's try this in the game as well. So instead of using my D-pad to dash back and forward, they can use the analog stick. I think it's harder stick, but some people can use it really nicely, so that's up to you. Well, let's try something simple like a fireball. Okay. Using this notched D-pad, I'm going to keep calling it the notched D-pad, is that when you need to make sure that you have released your stick in the forward position, then you know that you're there. Now, I'm curious to know how this will feel on a charge character, because on a charge character, it's actually nicer to have a square gate on a traditional arcade stick, but it's not that common to have these notched analog sticks. But if you play a charge character, who knows, maybe this controller would actually feel quite nice, because you can lock yourself into the down back position and then do your flash kicks. We'll try that in a moment. But first things first, let's just try some fireballs. Dashing in, Tatsumaki, Dragon Punch. Alright, this is quite nice. I don't think that I would switch to using the analog stick. I think I will always still prefer the D-pad. But if you like playing on analog stick, this is significantly, I mean, I assume this is significantly better than using an analog stick that doesn't have notches. Let's test my theory about charge characters. Alright, so using the normal D-pad, obviously you can hold back a couple seconds, fire out the fireballs. You can also hold down back and then send out our sonic booms. How about our flash kicks? Hold down back. Flash kick, no problem. But now here's what's really interesting is we want to see how it feels to use this analog stick. On an analog stick, using my thumb, I'm not particularly good at going straight from all the way back to forward. But I mean, it is possible, but this is not my preferred controller for playing with a charge character. Interesting. Okay, so it does feel like you can lock into this position. It's not maybe as nice as having a square gate on an arcade stick, but it's much, much better than having just a standard analog stick that isn't with these notches. But by having these notches, it's like down, down, back are very specific positions. There we go. Huh, not bad. So yeah, not as nice as having a square gate on an arcade stick, but then I don't think you would want a square gate on an analog stick. I think this is probably the best balance, having a notched 8-way gate on this analog stick. And as you can see, we've got our shortcuts set up, so we've got our left button and our L trigger as well, set for our V trigger buttons, and I've got it set to throw, but obviously you can set it to whatever you want in the game. Alright, so charge character, feels pretty good. Now it's time to try 360 characters. Zangief versus Dan. Alright, so first time trying a 360 character. I mean that because the reason I say 360 character is because a lot of his moves require you to spin the stick around. But first things first, let's try the normal D-pad. So let's check out the input in the top left-hand corner. It looks like it did come out correctly. So it actually does all of the inputs and it doesn't miss them. Let's try it really fast. Yep, even if I do it really, really fast, it doesn't miss or skip any of the cardinal directions. Thank goodness. All right, how about a super? No problem whatsoever. Lovely. Now the next thing I want to try is with the analog stick. See how it feels to do a 360 motion? Okay. Okay, and you do feel the notches, but I'm gonna be honest. These notches are very subtle. Like, you do feel them, but it's not like... Oh, no, that's actually, you know, I was going to say they're really subtle, but it's like, it does feel like it's clicking a bit. It's quite cool, actually. Nice. Okay. Well, basically, there's just very little to complain about. This is a very respectable D-pad. I would say that it is a step above this D-pad here. This is the original Fighting Commander. Although this does the job perfectly well, I really quite like this one, which is like a full circle, and you only really feel the corners if you push on them, but you do feel them. Like the pad of your thumb is fleshy, so you do feel those parts of it, and it does give you like a feeling of security, like you know exactly where you are on the D-pad. And I don't know, I'm not the type of person that plays with my thumb all the way in, but I know that some people do. But the D-pad feels nice. This analog stick with this 8-way, this octagonal gate, which is basically where the name of the controller comes from, the Octa. And one last thing I want to try is Ibuki, because she's got some command grabs. Feels nice. Let's try it nice and fast. Not skipping any cardinal directions. Very happy to see that. Okay, one thing that I will say about this pad, which is different to the original Fighting Commander, however, is the shape of the pad in general. Now, you may not notice this, but this has got a very shallow sort of palm rest, and as a result, it actually kind of rests on your lap quite nicely, because it's not got this weird angle. So when you're playing on a controller like this, it doesn't really move around too much, and it stays nice and flat. But what I noticed with the Octa and this is not really a problem, and I'm sure that you can just get used to this, but because it's got this longer, sort of elongated handle for where your palm goes, when you're resting this on your leg, I do feel like it just naturally wants to, can you see, it just sort of naturally wants to tilt forward while you're playing. So normally I would want it like this, but it kind of tilts away from me when I rest it on my lap. Again, it's not something that you can't deal with. I mean, you could just put a little pad on your lap to make sure that it always plays at a nice angle. But if you don't have a pad on your lap, do note that when you rest it on your lap, it will probably kind of tilt away from you. But again, that's not going to screw up your inputs massively. Something I haven't really been mentioning too much is the fact that these buttons actually feel really nice. Now, I completely just glossed over it really quickly when we first started trying it, but these buttons, unlike buttons that are mechanical and don't click, these buttons, like, you can rest your thumb on them, and then when you pressed it, you feel it. Like, I'll put it up here against the mic so you can hear it. Even though I'm not mashing it from all the way up here, like, and I can audibly hear the click, just resting very lightly on the button and just pressing it like this. Like, I think other controllers that have gone for mechanical switches, they ended up not putting clicks in for whatever reason. Maybe they just thought it would be faster and more responsive. But I think with a pad controller, because of the way that you rest your fingers on the buttons, maybe you're not supposed to, but that's how I play. Because I rest my fingers on the buttons, even when I just press them very lightly, like that, I want to be able to know that the input definitely came out, and it definitely feels nice to have that haptic feedback, that tactile feedback of the click. And that is really nice on these buttons. I think they actually made the right choice, personally, to go with these longer paddles for the palm rest. Because on the original Fighting Commander, although this was quite nice for people who rest it on their lap and play like this, I reckon the number of people who do that is probably fewer than the number of people who just hold the controller traditionally like this. And what's the benefit now is that on your right hand, you now have access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8 buttons. So you now have 8 buttons, action buttons that you can press with just your right hand, and you still have access to the shoulder buttons on the left. That is one of the primary gains of using a controller like the Fighting Commander, or any controller that has a 6-button layout on the front. So personally, the way I would use this controller, even though I think one of the cool benefits is being able to, rest it on your lap and press all 3 fingers on here and play it like an arcade stick, like a teeny tiny little arcade stick. I think probably one of the main ways people will use it is just traditional holding grip like this with a pad controller, but just benefit from the access to all 10 of these buttons. But we're not done yet. I still want to try a few other things that you can't do in Street Fighter, things like air dashing. So let's try out an anime fighter, shall we? Alright, it's been a long time since we played Dragon Ball FighterZ, but I thought for a change of pace, let's use this game to test our anime movement. So in anime games, often you have things like double jumping. You've also got the ability to dash mid-air, and sometimes you can even dash backwards. But one thing that you often want to do in an anime fighter is do an instant air dash, where you jump forward and then you press forward really quickly after that to do an instant air dash. Now, I'm no master of playing Dragon Ball FighterZ on pad, but it does feel like there's no problem doing instant air dashing on a pad, on this pad controller, the HORI Fighting Commander OCTA. Alright, it's been a while since I played Blaze Blue Cross Tag, but we can also try our instant air dashing here. Now, the thing about instant air dashing in this game is that you can also, there's also a shortcut built into the game. You can just press up and then press 2 buttons at the same time. So A and B will give you an instant air, well, I said an instant air dash. It'll dash as soon as you press the button. So as long as you press up A, B at the same time, you do the instant air dash, and it's significantly easy. So this game doesn't really test the D-pad as much as other games do. But in this game, you can do it the manual way as well, so you can jump forward and press forward like that, and you can do your instant air dashes. It feels pretty good to me so far. All right, let's see if I can still do this combo on pad. Feels really nice to have these big buttons. They're much larger than your average buttons that you might find on a smaller D-pad. But well, I mean, they're not significantly bigger, but they're a little bit bigger. All right. I think what I'm noticing right now, which is really interesting, is that these buttons are really nice in that they've got very little resistance. You press the button and it feels like they just go down with absolutely no effort. Really, the only pressure you have to exert is because there is a clicky switch in it, but it goes down really nicely. As opposed to the membrane buttons on a controller like this. Now, this is also quite a nice controller, but you feel with the membranes, it's kind of like you push, you can actually push quite a lot and then it doesn't really go down, and then suddenly kind of clicks down, and it's got a sort of, I don't know how to describe it, it's just like you push until it finally goes in like that. And I feel like with mechanical switches, one of the nice things about mechanical switches is that they go down very easily with very little pressure, but you still maintain that tactile feeling of knowing exactly when the button has activated. Okay, so we're finally going to end this with just a quick run through of Under Night In-Birth Exhalate Claire. This is the game I've been playing the most recently. I find that this character, the character that I play the most at the moment, Seth, he requires very precise movement. You need a controller that you can rely on that doesn't give you like random inputs or miss inputs while you're trying to do these moves. Okay, so general movement feels good. I can dash like this. You can also press A and B at the same time to dash. You can jump, dash backwards, dash forwards, backwards, forwards, throw fireballs, orbs rather. I just realized I've never done this combo on a pad before. I'll tell you what, I like the travel on the trigger buttons. Not travel as much as like, you know, the trigger button on a DualShock 4. Not this much travel, but it's, you know, it's got a good solid 1 or 2 millimeters here. All right, yeah, I did it once. And how does it feel to play with the analog stick? Oh, no, I definitely wouldn't play with the analog. Okay, so listen, the analog stick feels really nice, but people who play with analog stick, how do you dash fast enough? Like, my thumb just does not, my thumb just cannot do this movement. It's the quarter circle motions on the analog stick. I missed the diagonal because I'm not doing a full circle. If you don't do what's known as riding the gate, like on an arcade stick, you can go like down, down, back, back. But you don't have to do all the way down, all the way to the corner, and all the way back. You can actually just do a small, tiny little motion, and it will still work as long as you activate the switches. So what I'm saying is, if I were to actually use the analog stick on here, I would probably have to adjust the dead zone. Though I'm not actually sure if you can adjust the dead zone on this. I'll have to look that up in a sec. Yes! Okay, so, wow! I did that on the analog stick. If you do this, like a quarter circle, can you see all the directions for the quarter circle do come out? But if you do a very small motion, you only get downside. As it stands, I feel like if I'm not riding the gate, then I risk missing out some of these directions. Feels really good. Being able to do, I just really like how clean it feels to press neutral up and then go straight from neutral up to cardinal right. I like it, feels nice. Alright, so there you have it for the HORI Fighting Commander OCTA. This controller, something you should know about it is that it costs $50. And by comparison, you can get this controller for $40. This is like an evolutionary leap ahead of what this controller was, and I already quite liked this controller. You can still buy it, but for just $10 more, like on the recommended retail price that they're charging, this controller here, the Fighting Commander OCTA, I just gotta hand it to them. This is something that so many companies screw up, and it doesn't have to be screwed up. You can, you know, roll around to all the directions, and it doesn't miss directions when you're going around and you're doing your circular motions, or your full 360 motions, or your fast dashes, or instant air dashes. Like, I feel like the D-pad on this controller is very reliable, and that's all that really matters. To be honest, the fact that these are really nice mechanical buttons with clicky switches in it, the fact that this analog stick has an 8-way gate, a lot like an arcade stick on it, the fact that it has good travel on these shoulder buttons, doesn't matter to me at all. All that matters is that it has a nice D-pad, and I'm very happy with this D-pad. It's curious that they didn't go for a D-pad with clicky switches. Like, it's a membrane pad, and so although it is leaps, I would say it's like leaps and bounds, considerable step up from the D-pad on the Fighting Commander, which I already quite liked, but it's not perfect. This one feels really nice. I really like it. It's just kind of interesting that they decided not to go for clicky switches when they went for clicky switches over here. I think the analog stick is usable, but I would prefer if the dead zone were editable. It's wired, which is standard for all arcade sticks. I mean, I think some controllers are wireless, but it's quite standard to plug into the console when you go to like a fighting game tournament anyway, so I like that it's wired. The buttons feel fantastic. I do like that they're mechanical, so they're very easy to press, and then also they require very, very little tension. They require so little tension to press, a lot like a standard arcade stick button, because again, on an arcade stick button, it's just a matter of just pressing it down. There's really very, very little resistance. I think these switches are like 45 grams switches, can't remember. But it's very easy to press these buttons, and the only resistance is the click, and you want that, I think. Personally, I like that these are clicky switches, because you feel when you're, for example, when you're playing a fighting game with headphones on, like when you're in a tournament, it gives you a sense of confidence knowing that you have definitely activated the button, because you're going from resting your thumb on a button to like a millimeter down, like between here and here. This is like a millimeter or half a millimeter of travel. So it feels nice to have that click to let you know that you have activated the button. I also feel like this is a good amount of travel for these buttons. They don't feel like really expensive buttons, but I feel like for a fight pad, you're not going for something that feels expensive. You're going for something that feels reliable. I don't even know what half of these buttons do, but I have a feeling that this is the profiles buttons. And so I was able to set 4 separate profiles, which is awesome, because even if you're not just living with other people who use this controller as well, you could just set 4 different profiles for yourself. Like one is the one where like I have to push really hard on the diagonals to get them to come out. One last thing I will say about the controller is it doesn't feel very heavy. Like this is a very, very light controller, so I don't know if that bothers you. Pretty much all the controllers I have are fairly light. I think the original Fighting Commander, it feels like almost like a couple grams heavier than this one, which is really strange. This controller is extremely light, so make of that what you will, but personally I would have liked to see this camera. I would have liked to see this controller feel a little bit weightier, because it would have given it a sense of like, I don't know, higher quality. But again, I didn't have any issue playing with it because it was light. Like it wasn't like falling out of my hands or anything. But apart from that, I am super impressed and really glad that they didn't screw up the D-pad, because it would have been so painful if they had put all of these cool features into this pad and then they'd screwed up the D-pad. It'd be like, oh, I really wanted to love you. This basically ticked all the right buttons for me. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this first look at the HORI Fighting Commander OCTA as much as I have. It has been great fun, and it massively surpassed my expectations. Great D-pad, awesome features that I wasn't even expecting, and some cool stuff that I might try out more that I, wouldn't normally want to use the analog stick, but maybe I will in the future. If you want to see more stuff about arcade sticks, gamepads, got plenty more stuff coming out in the future, and plenty of videos that I've already made about a number of controllers that I've already unboxed. Do check them out. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below if there's something I missed out, because again, I've done as meticulous a look at the controller as I possibly can, but I will have missed things. And if you know stuff about the controller that you want to point out, or maybe stuff that I got incorrect, do let me know in the comments section below. Until the next Nihongo Gamer video, I'll see you around. Oh, and don't forget to check out the live stream, because I'll probably update my opinions, because who knows, maybe I'll change my mind about the controller in the future. So stay tuned.